Do UK supermarkets allow you to live well for less? Or does every little saving help more over in Portugal? Are all supermarkets big on slogans but little on facts? But what about the day-to-day cost of living? Is food and drink from the supermarkets any more expensive here in Portugal than back in the UK? When we lived in the UK, we would be bombarded with advertising and propaganda about how the supermarkets are working tirelessly to provide us with the cheapest of produce, and also how poor farmers are being thumbscrewed into poverty by the grocery oligarchy. So it must be true, right? So in this video I want to do three things. First, I want to explain what we've done and how we've done it. Then secondly, I want to go through each category in our study and show you which is cheaper, the UK or Portugal. And then thirdly, I want to extrapolate this data going forwards to see how it might affect us in years to come. We have lived in Portugal for 5 years now, and so we wanted to do a comparison. And I thought no better place to start than the national basket, the theoretical list of goods that is used to calculate the Consumer Price Index, which is a guide used to gauge inflation. So to start, I downloaded the list from the Office of National Statistics. Now on this list this year, there are 171 food and drink items split into 13 categories. The list changes each year to reflect the changing buying habits of the British public, but a fair degree of flexibility in the list should make for a fair comparison. Items that are too country specific are excluded. Things like trumpets and Yorkshire puddings would be speciality items here in Portugal and would be hard to find, or so expensive it would be detrimental to the study. And what I did was to go through each item this list and identify a product on the Tesco's website that met that criteria. Where possible, I went for own brand products and looked for potential matches in quality and pack sizes. I would then go onto the Auchan website for Portugal and find the corresponding product. I converted all of the UK costs into euros and I converted all pack sizes to match the Portuguese equivalent. And this gives an adjusted UK cost for the product, which can be directly compared to the cost of the Portuguese product. And by doing this for each item on the list, we should be able to give a good idea of, are groceries cheaper in the UK or in Portugal? And you won't believe what the final figure was. But before we start, let me know in the comments what country you predict has the cheapest shopping basket. So let's start with the first category on the list, and that covers bread and cereals. And after exclusions, this category contains 21 items, including rice, pasta, breads and cereals, things that provide your starchy carbohydrates. Now, as a reminder, when we show the amount on the screen, we will be showing the gap between the selected items and not their actual or absolute price. And when the cost per item is shown in red, then that means the UK version came in cheaper. And when the cost or item is shown in green, then that item came in cheaper in Portugal. A rapid breakaway early doors for the UK and Tesco's, with their quiche, gluten-free products and breakfast cereals being the items with the largest cost saving. The quiche, though, probably being on the cusp of the cultural deletion, as it seems to be only sold as a deli item in our local Auchan, but I guess it balances out over the study. Whereas on the Portuguese side, it was chilled pizzas, rice cakes and selected biscuits that were cheaper. So let's have a quick look at the other items in the category. And after all 21 items have been matched and the cost calculated, the UK supermarkets provide a cheaper product in 14 of them, with household and family staples such as bread, flour and cereal all proving to be better value in the Tesco. And it would seem that it is far better to be in the UK for gluten-free, restrictive diets or allergy-free products. But overall as a category, this one came out in favour of the UK supermarket, with the Portuguese price for the items coming in at €42.72 and the Tesco equivalent coming out at €38.04. So the UK is up by €4.68. And a strong start then for the UK, and one that can probably be explained by one of the successes of the British farming industry. You see, the UK produces 54% of the food consumed by its inhabitants, which is admirable, but it pales when compared to the 81% that Portugal can boast. And yet, when it comes to oats, cereals and grains, it is almost 100% self-sufficient, and that includes over 90% of the wheat consumption, which is incredibly useful when you consider that it is expected that around 30% of a person's calories are coming from these starchy carbohydrates. The scales then show that the UK's early advantage, and it's looking positive for the bold claims of the UK supermarkets. But let us continue. And the next category that is on the national basket is that of meat and fish. Now there are a few cultural exclusions here, but I did want to make sure that the items I was comparing were actually comparable. And after exclusions, 17 items remained. Now it's worth noting that the Portuguese still buy most of their meat and fish from in-store butchers and mongers, whereas the Tesco website would seem to indicate that this isn't a popular option now in the UK, so I did what I could. I would also say that for some items like sausages, the meat content in the Portuguese version is often far higher than the UK equivalent, which has been overlooked for this study. So on the UK side, the top 3 items that were cheaper than their equivalents were beef mince, fish fingers and frozen chicken nuggets, with beef mince almost certainly benefiting from larger volumes sold due to the British speciality dishes like cottage pie, while the Portuguese save more on fresh salmon steaks, turkey and pork chops. Most fresh meat comes in at around 3/4 of the price of the UK equivalent, and also comes with less overall packaging, and some pretty big gaps in cost as well. However, there was one anomaly. For pre-cooked sliced ham, the Ocean price and the size and currency adjusted price of the Tesco ham came in at exactly the same. So no surprises, this category came out heavily in favour of the Portuguese and their more traditional way of shopping, with the UK customers' basket coming in at €146.21, while the Portuguese basket is only €117.18, giving a huge boost to the Portuguese supermarkets of €29.03. And worth pointing out at this stage that the Portuguese do pay VAT on their foodstuffs, with a sliding scale of 6% for essentials, 13% for non-essentials and 23% for some luxury and import items, whereas for the lucky UK customer, they are fortunate to pay 0% VAT on food purchases. They just get you in other ways. And this puts Portugal in the lead after 2 categories by a whopping €24. And on to category 3, and that's milk, cheese and eggs. Now there are a few cultural differences here that I may be accommodated rather than excluded, such as the preference here for UHT milk rather than fresh. But after things were removed, 13 items were left in this category, with the big Portuguese saver items being non-regional cheeses, soya milk and long life milk. But in fairness, most costs were very comparable, with little savings to be found. From the UK side of things, powdered baby milk, yoghurt and chocolate milk all came in cheaper, with yoghurt being a high percentage less than the Portuguese equivalent. And a quick count of all of the items in the category will show that there was a slight favouring of the Portuguese products from a cost perspective, with the UK claiming 5 cheaper items compared to the Portuguese 7. But as a category, this one also came out in favour of the Portuguese supermarkets. The Portuguese shopper would expect to part with €39.79 for their goods, while the UK customer will be €41.97 worse off, adding an extra €2.13 to their tally, and putting the Portuguese basket up by €26 after 50 items, despite it being pretty close on the cheaper item count with a 24-26 split. And so, onto oils and fats. Surely this can be an area where the UK can proudly and rightly proclaim itself to be a global leader. Well, no. In fact, out of the 4 items in this category, only one of them came out cheaper in the UK, and that product was peanut butter, which gives a modest saving for the shopper from Blighty. For all other oils, butters and spreads, the Portuguese price worked out better for the wallet, with unexpectedly, as this is an olive growing country and region, olive oil providing the biggest saving on the UK price. But in review, most of the prices in this category were pretty similar. And so, with a total UK price of €12.72 compared to the Portuguese price of €11.57, gives another €1.19 to the Portuguese tally, pushing it up to €27, cheaper after 4 categories. And with the UK total spend coming in at around €240, the Portuguese basket is coming in around 10 to 12% cheaper at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes with our next category. And that next category is, which contains 18 products after exclusions and a mix of fresh fruit, canned fruit, frozen fruit and dried seeds and fruit. And for the UK supermarkets, they seem to be able to command a better deal for exotic fruits like pineapple and kiwi, but also for bags of frozen mixed berries. The country of origin on their products seem to be more global as well, probably to maintain a supply consistently throughout the year. On the Portuguese side, the top 3 savour items came in as strawberries, melon and canned fruit, but almost all of the items that were cheaper in this category were items that were grown either in Portugal or Spain, and at times of the year these prices can drop when the fruits are abundant. But overall, over the 18 products, the Portuguese basket would have cost €46.32 and the UK basket €45.03, which means that the UK claws some ground back, €1.29 to be exact, which leaves the Portuguese supermarket just €26 up after 5 categories. And so on to category 6, which is vegetables. And a whopping 25 items in this category, mainly fresh vegetables, but also some frozen and some canned, and even a couple of crisp type items. For the UK, baked beans, canned sweet corn and cabbage were the big 3 winners. And I can say with some certainty that 5 years ago when we first arrived, baked beans would have been put on the cultural exclusion list. But in the intervening years, and with the influx of people coming here from Northern Europe, baked beans have started appearing in more stores, and the cost is coming down. But even so, it still worked out as a huge saver for the UK. The Portuguese supermarkets provide bigger savings on courgettes, frozen chips and powdered mashed potato. And this is surprising in itself, that a country that either produces most of the vegetables or is adjacent to the country that produces a lot of the vegetables in Spain that are sent to the UK can't find bigger cost savings on fresh produce. Sweet potatoes, for example, is one which the source of origin was Portugal, and that was a fair bit cheaper in the UK, which again could be down to the seasonal and regional variations and the UK supermarket strategy of keeping the food available at all times of the year. The UK imports sweet potatoes from countries as far afield as Egypt, South Africa, Argentina and the USA. But overall then, 14 cheaper items for the UK shopper and just 11 cheaper in Portugal. And for these 25 items, the UK basket came in at €51.81, and the Portuguese supermarkets provided the same goods for €48.85, so another €2.98 onto the Portuguese score. And this, of course, does raise an eyebrow. How can the UK supermarkets be managing to provide such amazing deals, especially on food that is coming from Portugal? Well, part of this could come down to the way with which the UK supermarkets have been selling fruit and vegetables by the item, rather than by weight. So when looking at the comparison, most of the fruit and veg from Tesco is being sold by the item. So to make a comparison with the Portuguese equivalent, I had to look up on Google the average weight for each item. But of course, there can be quite some variation in weight depending on the size of the item, as this red cabbage example shows. One large red cabbage may come in around 1.1 kilogram, but a small head may only weigh 550 grams, which is half the weight. So which are the supermarkets selling, the large or the small? So I had a look at the comments. I have had bigger sprouts. Mine came on home delivery as less than 5 inches across. Very small. And I thought it was a red onion, disappointingly small. Could this be an example of hidden shrinkflation? I do think it will be interesting to see how much the Tesco's produce varies in weight from the average. But regardless of these potential Machiavellian moves from the UK grocers, it's a small win again for the Auchan, taking it up to €29 cheaper than the UK basket, with almost 100 items compared over 6 categories, and with a 47-50 split on cheaper items, so still very close. But category 7 is next, and that is sugar, jam, sweets and chocolates. Surely an area where the UK's love of confectionery will see it come out triumphant. Just 5 items in this category, but the list really doesn't highlight the sheer scale of variation that the UK has to choose from, with more flavours of chocolate, sweets, jams and even ice creams available in the UK than are offered in the Portuguese supermarkets. And Tesco sugar rushes into a strong start, with the highlights being squeezy honey, jam and chocolate bars. Whilst Portuguese quite rightly benefit from cheaper ice cream. And honestly, I think that any country that gets into the mid 40 degrees centigrade throughout the summer needs mandatory free ice cream, in my opinion. And also white sugar, although here people tend to use yellow sugar rather than white granulated. And so 3 items cheaper for the UK and just 2 items cheaper for Portugal. It will come as no shock to discover then that after this £9.53 spend in Tesco's and £10.17 in the Auchan, this one ended up with a small win for the British of 64 cents, which sees the gap come down slightly to a little under €29 over 102 items. And the item count is very close as well, 50-52 in favour of the continental supermarket. And so on to category 8, which is the last of the food categories on the national basket, and that category is a bit of a catch-all, seeing that it is called Other Foods. 5 more items in this category that avoid exclusion, and I guess for many people a fairly important category, seeing that this contains ready meals. And alas, for the UK shopper, only one of these items came in cheaper than the Portuguese equivalent, and that was for sauce, and specifically tomato sauce. Whereas the Portuguese purchaser pays less for protein powder, which may be in part to Prozis being a Portuguese company, also ready meals and herbs. And this makes the tally count 4-1 for this category in Portugal's favour, with €33.15 spent on the UK side and just €19.75 on the Portuguese. This adds a whopping €13 to the overall gap, thanks primarily to the protein powder saving, which brings the overall gap up to €42 after 107 items compared to a 51-56 split on cheaper items. And with 25 items still to come, it's still very much in the balance. Can the UK catch up? Well, with all the food items now covered, we move on to the drinks, And category 9 is for tea, coffee and cocoa, with 5 items on the list. For those that know, at the outbreak of the Second World War, the British government made the decision to buy all of the black tea from every country apart from Germany and Japan, to ensure that they didn't run out. And in fact, by the end of World War II, tea was in the top 5 purchases alongside bullets, explosives, shells and bombs. This is how important tea is to the British psyche. And in this category, once again, it seems to be coming out as favourable for the UK supermarket, with good savings to be made comparably on instant coffee, coffee machine pods and, surprise, surprise, tea bags. Whereas the Auchan comes out cheaper for flavoured teas and chocolate drink. And part of this may be down to cultural changes. Portugal has a strong cafe culture, and you get an espresso or an abatonado for about 70 cents in most places, so maybe these caffeinated drinks are more consumed out rather than at home, and it certainly isn't Costa Coffee prices. So 3 items cheaper for the UK and just 2 for Portugal. €15.99 spent in Tesco's and €16.79 in Auchan means it's another modest gain for the UK of almost €1, and makes the gap after 112 items a little over €41, with 51 items cheaper in the UK and 58 items cheaper in Portugal. So 4 categories left to go, and this next one is for water, soft drinks and juices, and 7 items under the microscope. Now, I have been led to believe that there are far less fizzy and sugary drinks consumed in Portugal than in the UK, so I would expect to see some savings on these items when looking at the figures. The UK did come out as cheaper for lemonades, full sugar cola and juices made from concentrate, while Portugal seemingly benefits from cheaper mineral water, energy drinks and diet cola. And also wins on the item count, with 4 of the 7 items coming out cheaper in Portugal. So €10.97 for the UK and €10.05 for Portugal means that Portugal also gains on the overall gap total, adding almost another €1 to the tally, which takes the item count to 119 items, with the UK languishing 5 items behind with just 13 remaining, and also pushing the cost gap out to a little over €42. And that completes the food and drink aspect of the national basket, and leaves us with the alcohol category still to go, with the first of the alcohol categories belonging to spirits, and there are 6 more tipples for which the comparative prices need to be compared, with some bad but maybe not unexpected news for the UK shopper, as rum, vodka and brandy all give big potential savings for the Portuguese. And even worse news when it is revealed that all of the 6 drinks in the category are cheaper in Portugal. And the bad news just keeps coming when you look at the total gap. €20 over 6 items is a fairly large difference, and one that can't just be explained away by the differences in VAT, where the UK government require their 20% of spirit sales, while the Portuguese financier only demand 13% on most alcohol. And of course, by adding the €20 to the gap tally, the overall gap amount now stands at almost €63. But with not only this, with 120 items already compared, 7 remaining, and Portugal having an 11 item lead, it looks like they are also going to come out ahead in both metrics. And that is before the last 2 categories are calculated. So moving onwards towards the final conclusion. But first, the category of wine, in which 5 items are listed. The 3 most popular wine colours, champagne and for some reason canned apple cider. And thank goodness for the inclusion of the canned apple cider, as it spared the UK's blushes. I've been reliably informed as well that the UK apple cider is a nicer drink too, so something to cling on to. Whereas Portugal comes out with a slightly inebriated smile after seeing comparable large discounts on champagne and wine in general. and also picking up another 4 items to 1 in the count tally. But with the UK customer paying €58 for their vino, while the Portuguese only have to find a little under €34 for the same, it gives an extra €24 to the Portuguese gap tally. And to explain this a little, Portugal is the 10th largest wine producer in the world, with 700 million litres produced each year. But to also explain a little more, Portugal's 10 million inhabitants consume 530 million litres of wine per year, which per capita is the second highest in the world. So there is a strong wine culture here that perhaps explains the low prices. And of course, going back to our study, that the gap now rises to €87 over 130 items, with Portugal now having a fair amount of clear air on the item count with a 72.58 lead. And so the final category, which is beer, just canned or bottles on this list, as the more artisan beers didn't survive the culture cull. And the budget Tesco's cans of beer came in slightly better than the Superbox, which aren't an own brand beer. But for bottles, the Auchan sold the box with the best offer. However, I think this is missing an important point. I can go to a cafe or bar here and get a cold bottle of beer for €1, which is around the same price as buying them from the supermarket. But even so, with beer adding an extra €5 to the gap between the UK and the Portuguese supermarkets, it makes for a grim end to the comparison for UK shoppers. Because after 132 items and almost €580 spent on the UK items and €486 on the Portuguese equivalent, it gives a final gap of €93, and I think that's a pretty big number. And of course it means that the Portuguese items came to 19% less. 19% is a huge figure. But what if I said it could be even bigger? Well, over here on a Monday, Auchan give a further 10% discount on all of their own brand items. And as I mentioned earlier, we are mostly selecting the own brand items for the study. So potentially over a €486 shop, we might be able to knock that down by a further €45. And on the UK side, Google suggests that using a club card at Tesco gives you about 1% back. So by adding this data to the study, we can see that if the national basket was proportionate, and it's not, and representative of a family's actual habits, it's not that either, then it would give an astonishing 29% reduction between the UK shopping spend and that of Portugal. And what does this data do for our long-term savings study? How might it affect my family and the amount we now spend? Well, according to the UK government, the average spend on groceries and supermarket bought alcohol comes to £32 per week per person. So for a family of 5, that's £160 per week, which sounds about right. 160 times 52 weeks and then converted into euros gives a final yearly expected spend on a slither under €10,000. And so by doing the same for the Portuguese basket, we can see that we are left with a 2025 spending gap between the UK and Portugal of almost €3,000, which is astonishing. But let's throw this forwards. In a recent video, I showed how we can potentially save ourselves almost €40,000 over 15 years by living off-grid. A link to this video is in the description if you haven't already. Please check it out. But when we project the food savings forwards by the same time frame, and also add a 2% inflation on both the UK and the Portuguese tally, we can see that by the end of 15 years, should this trend continue, then the Portuguese shopper will have spent €50,000 less for the same stuff as their UK counterpart. And by adding this to the €39,000 we save by not being connected to the grid, we are potentially saving ourselves €89,000 over 15 years. And this is money that we could put into other projects, improving our infrastructure and route to self-sufficiency. But that's not the end. More potential savings are there to be found in future videos, so be sure to like and subscribe to see how we get on. Thanks for watching.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. It's a pleasure to have you following along with our journey. We have added Buy Me a Coffee. If you would like to buy us a coffee, you can find the link in the description. And as always, wishing you a most beautiful day with something to make your heart sing. Bye!